Hey folks, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm Tom Amoroso, back with you for our second preview week night. It is Tuesday, July 28th, 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific. Thank you everybody for joining. I'm still here in one of my gear rooms at Columbus Saber Academy in Ohio. And again, I'm pretty honored to be with you guys tonight to continue to present some amazing content, all leading up to Virtual CombatCon this coming weekend. As I kind of said yesterday, and I'll say throughout the week, this would have been, and probably, I guess is, right, my third CombatCon experience. And, you know, pretty bummed we're not in Vegas. I think we all are. But I'm really excited about this and what we'll be able to do this weekend, this weekend. I really want to put a thank you out there. I'm going to say this every night to the CombatCon leadership team and officers for enabling all this free content for all of you, for myself, and for all of us to share and be a part of. Thank you to the incredibly talented team members who have contributed and will be presenting content all week. And all of you guys, of course, for attending, whether you're watching me live right now or going to watch us recorded when this lands on Facebook after we're done. Thank you all for attending. Quick reminder that the full schedule is posted on the CombatCon.com website. The link is in this body of text for the live video. So take a look there and click that. It'll also give you an opportunity to see the content that's going to be offered this weekend and register for classes for those that still need to. So please take advantage of that. Let's go through and talk about tonight. And if I'll just say this, if you missed last night's first night, it was a fun night. We had a lot of good discussions and some great, and actually all great content across the board. That is up on the Facebook page. I think we're at just over 2,500 views on that video. So if you haven't taken a look at that, please do. Some great stuff that was discussed in a fun little interview with Jared, Tim, and myself with our leadership team discussions. So that was kind of fun. Let's get things rolling for tonight. I'll go through the schedule. Morgana Alba is with us in the background here. She'll be joining us, kicking us off with some flexibility training tips and techniques. I hope you saw the post that we put out there. So if you do want to follow along, it's encouraged. Just have yourself a mat and a broomstick to use, and you can follow along with the training that's going to go out. We have an interview that was done back in CombatCon 2016 with Maestro Paul Mcdonald. And we have a video from Richard Marsden, who's discussing a comparison between Italian and German longsword, which is actually really nice. Great video. We'll continue the leadership team chat tonight with Kristen Kalberg. Come with us. And we'll close the night with Dr. Sarah Lewis and her video on neuroscience of effective motor learning. So we're only on day 2, right? We'll be here all week with new and exciting content every week, every night. Sorry, I wish it was every week. I think we all wish it was every week, including the Virtual CombatCon opening ceremonies, which is Friday night. So we're going to do everything on Friday night for the opening ceremonies here in the preview week, medium and format through Facebook Live. And that will lead us right into those that want to participate in the Zoom chats and sessions over the weekend. Hopefully that's all of you, right? Please post all your comments and questions here in the post the chat. I'm trying to monitor it as we go through. Hi to everybody out there. Thanks for saying hello. I'm trying to monitor it as we go. But again, if you don't have a chance to get a question asked or answered, just pop it into the chat. The content producers and talent here tonight and every night is going to be continuing to monitor that and reaching out. But please check out their sites, ping them offline and ask any questions you might have. Disclaimer. Right. This is all technology, so it could all go to crap at any point in time during the night. So please, keep in mind, nothing is perfect. Right. We may experience some connectivity and performance issues. If you're hearing something that's off, pop it in the chat. I'll see it. All right. So I am trying to look at both, and I'm actually hearing the chat in my ear. So I am monitoring the volume levels as well to make sure that we're all good to go there. All right. Let me do a couple things on this side and ask Morgana to join us. Cool. So let's kick it off. Morgana, thank you for joining us, and just come on in a second. Let me go through the bio. Morgana is a full-time performer and circus acrobat based in Washington, D.C. After growing up in martial arts and a short stint in the U.S. Army, she ran away to join the circus in 2014. And today, Morgana performs both internationally and trains stunt performers for tours and events, including Renaissance fairs, Marvel Universe Live, and Six Flag America. Morgana is a multi-skilled and award-winning performer, but her dominant fields are aerial dance and professional mermaiding. She enjoys bringing together rare and dangerous skills from breath holding to acrobatics to bullwhips to trick riding in order to create new and interesting stage shows. She first joined the CombatCon staff in 2016, where she uses her circus experience to cross-train fighters for injury prevention and the unique challenges of a live show. Morgana, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here.
I'm really excited to be here.
Cool. I will mute myself, turn it over to you, and come back on any point in time. Thanks.
All right, fantastic. So like Tom said, I specialize in live performance, and that has not prepared me for virtual shows. So this is going to be somewhat new to me too. If you've ever attended my classes at CombatCon, my most heavily attended class is flexibility and balance conditioning techniques for improved mobility in fighters. And so I'm going to start out with a little mini lecture on why balance and flexibility are important when you're not a circus acrobat, and instead are specializing in stage combat. Like Tom said, I work in a lot of different fields, everything from stage to trick riding to hanging from the ceiling from my ankles. So that gives me sort of a unique perspective on how the body moves, because circus is all about exploring what new, fun, and torturous ways we can get the body to move. And that has really given me a lot of background on how to prevent, frankly, going too far. So when you hear people talk about fitness, they normally talk about a pyramid or a three-pointed situation where it's flexibility, strength, and endurance are your three portions of fitness. If you ever work with a trainer, they're going to really harp on these three. And this class focuses a lot on flexibility and a lot on balance. And I think that balance is very important for fitness, but people tend to not understand where that fits into the triangle. So if you're at home and you've got a little bit of space around you, which I highly recommend, I want you to work with me on a little experiment to figure out where balance fits into the fitness pyramid. So stand up. I'm not going to because my screen is small, but go ahead and stand up. Sort of shake out your tension. Stand facing the screen. Take a deep breath, and then I want you to relax all of your muscles. Just absolutely everything. Let everything you've got go. No tension anywhere. If you didn't fall down, you did it wrong. At the end of the day, what balance is a measure of strength. Balance is what keeps us upright. Balance is what allows us to do handstands, lunges, all manner of insane things, throws. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about balance, what we are talking about is the strength side of that pyramid. So this class is going to focus on strength and flexibility. Since I only have half an hour, we're not going to go through everything I normally go through, which is a lot of balance games and techniques, but I'm going to go through my 4 favorite exercises for trying to build some conditioning and some balance at home. I'm going to use balance in 2 different terms. One, we're going to talk about that strength term of literally being able to keep yourself in whatever pose you decided to put yourself into. Unfortunately, because the English language is somewhat limited, I'm also going to use the word balance when talking about left-right balance in your body. Pretty much all fighters, even ambulateral ones, previously known as ambidextrous, are going to favor one side or another based on what activity they're doing. This causes an imbalance in your muscular structure. So we want to correct that as well, because that can have very long-term side effects to your overall health, especially to your spine, and can cause a lot of injury down the road. Balance and flexibility in this context are things we're going to focus on for the purposes of injury prevention. So going back to that pyramid, you have your strength, your endurance, and your flexibility. Flexibility is about, of course, range of motion. And where flexibility, by definition, focuses on what your range of motion is overall, we're also going to talk a bit about pliability. Pliability is your range of motion when you haven't warmed up, when you're cold. So someone might have incredible flexibility, but if they don't have similar pliability, they're still going to risk an injury when their body is pushed too far. So you might wonder, hey, I do steel combat, I do fencing, I do jousting. Why do I have to care about flexibility? I'm only ever in all of 12 poses. At the end of the day, flexibility is not about necessarily making your show more impressive as a feat. It's about protecting yourself from that one time that it goes wrong. When you step a little too far backward, when your sparring partner takes your shoulder a little too far back with their stroke, when you roll your ankle in the middle of a move. Flexibility is what's going to allow you to avoid a possibly very debilitating injury, particularly cuff tears. People don't tend to focus on their shoulders enough. Let's see, where are my notes? Right, okay. So that's about it for my lecture. I am going to get in the comments after I'm done teaching live, so I will be happy to answer any questions. Also, it is a pandemic. Do forgive me, I'm a wee bit out of shape. So bear with me on these exercises. All right, the first thing that people like to talk about with flexibility is splits. I don't know why. I can do some earth-shatteringly impressive things when I do aerial dance, and yet all anyone ever wants to see is the splits. So let's talk about the splits. If you go on YouTube, you're gonna find 100 exercises, but I'm gonna go ahead and give you one that works. We're gonna work on forward back splits because that's what's going to be more relevant to you as a combat performer, whether it's in front kicks or lunges or what have you. So working on our front back splits, we're gonna come back to our mat. The important thing to consider here when you're looking at your technique is keeping your hips square. If you start turning in or out, that is a type of flexibility and it's an important one, but it's not one that's going to aid you for your particular art form, most likely. So the first thing I want you to do is come into a basic lunge-ish, where you're gonna have one knee up. You wanna put your knee over your ankle, your back butt cheek over your knee, nice straight right ankles. Lovely day, easy work. Go ahead and extend your leg so that you're now flat with your foot on the floor, but you're keeping this nice and square. And we're gonna begin this stretch. We're gonna do this stretch 3 times for the sake of this class. I am only gonna hold it for about 10 seconds each time. We're gonna go through 3 iterations, and then we're gonna go into our split. When you are doing this at home, I really recommend holding poses for 30 seconds or more. These are all going to be passive stretching poses for these splits, but they're super effective. And they're a good place to start. So keeping your hips square, making sure your foot's not going out to the side. We're going to sit back somewhat on our heel. You are not trying to get your butt to connect to your heel. What you are trying to do is keep your toe on the mat. You're gonna feel this through this hamstring. So drop your chest down towards your knee till you're feeling a good stretch through here. And breathe for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Then without moving either foot, I want you to rock forward and lengthen your back leg as much as you can. You should be feeling this through your quad. If you are not feeling it through your quad, it means you're more flexible on this back leg. Just move your foot slightly forward. But what we don't want is for you to end up with an extreme bend with your knee being far past your ankle. Try to keep this straight. Stretch out that back leg as much as it's needed till you feel it down the squat. Do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Without moving either foot, you're gonna rock back. So we're extending this again. Once again, drop your butt so that you feel the stretch through your hamstring. Drop your chest. Now, when we do this, we're gonna talk about another piece of flexibility, mostly because I like to make you hold things. Flexibility and the pain that you feel when stretching, that pain is important. It's there to tell you that you're pushing your limits and that you might be risking an injury. In order to prevent injury, your body actually tenses up to try to fight you going any deeper into that stretch. So while we're here, take a big breath, tighten everything in your body all the way down to your toes, tighten, 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 and then relax and drop a little bit further into that stretch. You're gonna be shocked how much further you get. That was well over 10 seconds. So rocking forward. If you're not feeling the stretch this time, extend that back leg. Keep this mostly straight. Stretch this as much as you need to until you feel that hamstring go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last one. I'm gonna work on that tightening and releasing on both sides now. So push yourself a little further, drop your chest, deep breath, tighten, 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 hold it, hold it, hold it, squeeze, 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 and then relax. Drop your butt a little bit more. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last time for the other direction. Sit up straight. Get that nice stretch through the quad. Deep breath, squeeze everything tight as you can. Tight, 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 tight. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. And relax. Drop your hips a little bit more. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now for my favorite part, because even doing this once, even in the short time we've done it, people tend to be very impressed with how much lower they'll get than they've ever gotten in their life. Place your hands left and right of your foot without moving that front foot. Just slide that back foot back. Oh, it is still there. And see where you get. If this is incredibly uncomfortable, I don't care. Hold it. And then squeeze everything below the waist. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Release. Whoo. And take it all the way down. And go ahead and roll out of that. Do not try to lift yourself up. You're pushing muscles that you probably haven't pushed in a while because pandemic. And if you're not used to the splits, you're probably in a very awkward position about a foot off the ground. Nobody needs to get an injury getting out of a split. That would just be embarrassing. If you get injured, do it going in. All right, we're gonna try the other side now. And this one I really will only make you hold for 10 seconds at a time. Said every trainer ever. All right, so placing our front foot so that we are knee over ankle. Squaring our hips straight forward. Ooh, I'm a little bit wide. And back knee as straight as we can. We're then gonna point that toe for our starting position and start to drop our butt and our chest till, ooh, this is my bad side. Ooh, till we feel it through that quad. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Rolling our weight forward, knee over ankle. If you need a deeper stretch, extend that back foot back, feeling it through this quad. And breathe. Ooh, sit up also, don't be lazy like me. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, now we're gonna start with squeezing. Rocking back, dropping our chest till we feel it through this quad, or through this hamstring. And squeeze, 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 squeeze. Breathe out. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's try rocking forward. If you're getting a muscular quiver, a spasm, it shouldn't be a problem. It feels weird. It's just because you're activating muscles you haven't used in a while or at all. So stretch, deep breath, squeeze everything below the waist as tight as you can, all your muscles all at once, and release. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, last one. Rock back. Try to drop your chest a little further. Try to drop your hips a little further. Feel it all the way through here. It should be knee to butt unless you are particularly tight in your calf, or in your, plantar muscle. All right, push yourself a little further and squeeze everything. Squeeze, 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 release. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And finally rocking forward, pushing ourselves a little further, squeezing everything below the waist, super, super tight, and let go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And slide back. Yeah, this is the bad side. Like I said, most people have a dominant side. Amusingly, your more flexible side tends to be the opposite of your strength side. And that is, again, because your strength is your muscles trying to protect yourself from being able to move in a way that will hurt them. Your flexibility is increasing your ability to move in those directions. Squeeze it, squeeze, 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 hold, 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 tight, 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 and let go. Woo, there we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, roll out. Butt to ground, legs together, nice and easy. It's a pretty simple exercise, guys. And why I like that one is that even at home, so long as you don't push your knee past your toes on that front leg, it's not one you're likely to injure yourself doing, practicing on your own. It is also incredibly effective. It is the best split stretch I've ever found. So if you work that out 3-4 times a week, you will be shocked by how fast your splits come in, even if you've never been able to do them in your life. The reason that we squeeze everything really, really tight before we let go is basically tricking your brain. It's hard to get your brain to relax the muscle that is literally seizing up, trying to protect your body from damage. But if you squeeze everything and let everything go at once, then it tends to let all that tension out. You can get another 2 inches sometimes on your splits. So that's splits. Okay, moving forward, we're gonna do one of my favorite shoulder stretches. Shoulder mobility in fighters is abysmal. I love you all, but it's really, really, really bad. Most of you are used to a not much past neutral and then fully forward motion. You overdevelop 2 out of the 5 muscles in your shoulders. It's great for what you're trying to do, whether you're working with a lance or a sword or frankly punching. However, you don't tend to get the range of motion. I will tell you that rotator cuff injuries in your shoulders are one of the worst injuries to try to come back from. There are surgeries, they're not great. So being able to protect your shoulders is extremely important. And one of the best ways you can protect your shoulders from injury is through flexibility. Again, there's 5 muscles. They sort of form a protective case around your shoulder socket, and getting that rotation through, and the further back you can get that, the more you're prepared again for the one time that your shoulder gets taken too far, because all it takes is once. So for this, grab your broomstick or your bow staff or your long bow. What you're looking for is any long rigid structure that you can put some pressure on without it moving too far. So actually long bow may not be a good idea. All right, I have a Swiffer because I'm a modern woman. All right, so here we go with this. I want to stress on this exercise that you need to go slowly, extremely slowly, more slowly than you think you need to go, please. Also, you need to go evenly. You do not want to be in one shoulder versus the other shoulder. It needs to go together. And while one shoulder, again, will likely be more flexible and it will likely be your less strong shoulder, it's important to move them as one because the stresses change if you start working on an imbalance. Okay. Place your broomstick across your hips, or if you're standing, just let your arms relax. And I want you to take a pretty wide grip. Go ahead and spread your arms out. We're going to try to figure out your baseline for this. You're going to bring the broomstick up, and without letting go and without doing one before the other, bring it all the way back to your butt. Do not change grip. Nice and slow. Then from your butt, again, nice and slow, we're going to bring it all the way forward. And if you were like, cool, whatever, that was easy, totally lame, go ahead and move your hands in a little bit. We want to find your baseline. You're going to feel a stretch, but you don't want to feel pain. So bring your arms in a little bit, and then take a deep breath and roll up nice and slow. So most people can go through this range fine. It tends to get hard around here. Over the shoulder gets real hard. Breathe. And down to your back. For most people, you're going to feel this in the front of your shoulder. I would point, but my arms are on the broomstick. And then take a breath and come back up and over. Slow. Frankly, I was even going a little bit fast. If that's enough of a challenge, go ahead and move them in. This is a great exercise because it's very self-governing. You can move your hands in at your own pace. It's something I recommend if you're just sitting there watching TV, hanging out. This is an easy thing to do. But the big thing is to take it slow, and the big thing not to do, I'm going to go wide so I don't hurt myself when I do this, is go shoulder, shoulder. That is a very bad idea, very dangerous. So the other thing to work on if you're having some struggle and you're pushing where you think your hands could be, it's just a little bit tight, but you're not quite sure if you can get through, is to really work on your breathing. When you breathe in, think about pushing your shoulder blades together. Lift your chest and squeeze your shoulder blades. It's going to pull your chest up the way that your chest should be going when you're doing pull-ups, because this is, frankly, the antithesis of those muscles. So, deep breath, nice and slow, over the head, and back. Breathe for a second. Nice and slow. Oh, up and over and down. Depending on how you've developed, which is very dependent on what your primary art forms are, you might feel this all the way through to your pecs. It's going to work on the pectoral minora and up through this muscle, and pretty much depending on the flexibility of your shoulder, up to the first 3 front muscles in your shoulder. Yeah. So we're going to give it one more. Nice and slow now. Get to about here, and then breathe, breathe, breathe. Good. Relax, breathe. And then nice and slow through this rear rotation. And roll down. Especially if you work with any sort of heavy weapon, a sword, those aren't themselves heavy, but the pole can be something. Anything that really focuses on building that shoulder strength, I highly recommend you do this exercise. Do it for a day, see how sore you are tomorrow, try 5 or 10 repetitions. If you don't wake up in pain, then, do it again that day. If you are waking up in pain from stretching, do give yourself a day between stretching. Literally what you're doing is sliding the muscle fibers along each other and sort of pulling them apart like in a rope. Whereas if you know from strength training, you're sort of creating micro fissures, and then the muscle rebuilds, making itself stronger. With stretching, we're literally lengthening those fibers, which causes its own stress on your muscles. So if you are waking up sore from deep stretching, I recommend some just general range of motion stretching, but don't try to go deep every single day. Got to give your body time to recover. Moving forward, one of the places that gets really sort of pushed to the side in flexibility is the upper back. Unfortunately, people have a tendency to focus on their lower back rather than their upper back when trying to do back bends or any sort of motion like that. This can be problematic because people will become hyper flexible in their lower back and not flexible at all in their upper back, which can cause spinal damage. So again, we want to focus on how to work on moving our body and so that it can do what we ask it to do at the time that we ask it to do a little too much. So upper back flexibility, we're going to talk about camels and cobras in yoga poses. Yoga is fantastic. Highly recommend it. Good range of motion, 5 stars. That being said, what I'm going to go over is not so much your traditional yoga as it is trying to use the yoga pose to stretch. So I think based on time, we're probably just going to go over camels. So typically when people go to stretch their back, they'll hit this pose. Which is a very lazy cobra on my part. This, as you can tell, puts the bend in this lower back. Now, if you are pretty decent at yoga, you're probably going to stretch in your upper back. But again, I'm focusing this on beginners and people who are just trying to use their body. So we're going to work on what's called a camel. Well, no, we're not. We're going to do this one instead. I've changed my mind. So it's a modified cobra pose. You're going to go down on your elbows. You want your elbows below your shoulders. Give yourself like a decent right angle there. For your hands, make a fist with one hand, grasp it with the other hand, keep them centered on your body. And what we're going to do is drop our chest and then pull our chest up and forward. And we're going to try to create that same right angle that people create in cobras, but you should feel it right about here in your back, because by immobilizing our lower half, we're now forced to take that stretch up. So this is a mid back stretch versus an upper back stretch because I have changed my mind. So if you're not getting enough of a stretch, just trying to pull your head up and look forward, what I want you to do is think about sinking your belly button into the floor. And meanwhile, think about pushing your chest forward between your arms, like you're trying to get it against the wall in front of you. And that should activate that stretch. Like anything else, you want to be able to hold this for some time. I recommend 30 seconds to a minute, depending on your comfort level. All right, go ahead and relax that. And on this next one, we're going to work on creating that tension in our bodies in order to release our tension in the zone that we're working on. And we're only going to do this once out of consideration for how much time we have. So from a nice relaxed position, you should be at probably some sort of an angle based on where your arms are. Push our belly button into the floor. Roll our chest up and pull it forward towards the wall. And then I want you to squeeze everything in your body all the way down to your toes as tight as you can. Squeeze, 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 and then release. And again, try to pull your chest forward. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Release that. Drop your chest down and start to roll back. And we're going to do a pose here, which is important anytime that you are stretching your back and your spine this way. You want to then lengthen the spine by curving the other way. So real quick with me, place your head on the ground, behind your legs, grab both your arms so that you have something to pull against, and then pulling against these arms, push your back up to the ceiling. That should actually feel quite good. We'll have for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Anytime that you're working on your back bends and that sort of flexibility, the goal is to lengthen and then tilt the spine, vertebrae against vertebrae. But no matter how you do that, again, the goal is to sort of push those edges of vertebrae together. So anytime we do that, we want to make sure that we roll the spine back the other way, separate those vertebrae, give yourself that range of motion so you don't end up with anything pinched. We're going to go through one more exercise, and then I'll let you all go back to Tom. This is one of my favorites because it tends to freak people out because it doesn't look as hard as it is. So this one is more of a balance exercise than it is a flexibility thing. And like I said, balance is a way of measuring strength. And trust me, this is going to push that strength. So these are what I like to call push-throughs or roll-throughs. People call them different things. And you're going to start in a plank position. So if you're here, and I forgot that entertainment center was right there. So find your nice neutral plank, nice, big, and strong. And then what we're going to do is push up to what is a modified downward dog. You're not trying to get your heels down. This is really just a starting position, but it's essentially a modified downward dog. The goal of this exercise is to try to push your nose, chin, chest, and belly button through your hands as close to the mat as you can possibly get without touching the mat. So when you do it, it looks like this, and you do bend your arms. And then up into what is essentially a modified cobra. Try to go slowly. It's very difficult. From here, you can push back up to here, and then try again. But if you find that you've got that, you have already strengthened those muscles, that's not much of a challenge. Try to go backwards and bring your belly button, chest, and nose as close as you can while moving backwards through your arms and pushing your hips back up. So this one goes this way. And what you should be finding is that on this motion, you're feeling it in your upper abs and your biceps and possibly somewhat in your quads. And then on this motion, you're really feeling it in your upper abs and likely also your shoulders. This one's fun. This one is one you can challenge your buddies to. If you're struggling with the initial motion, keep your head and chest and belly button higher off the mat. The lower you go, the harder it's going to be. The slower you go, the harder it's going to be. You can speed up the move or slow down the move to your comfort level, but what you should not do is be using gravity and momentum to swing yourself through. That's a recipe for disaster. And if you're not sure what that looks like, it's this. I'm going to back up so I don't bash my head. Not good. We don't like that. Instead, we want nice and controlled. All right. So that's roll throughs. All of these are just really good exercises you can do at home a couple times a week, and you really will notice a difference in your flexibility. The goal is for you to also start to find muscle groups you probably haven't directly attacked before. All in all, the end game is to make sure that we are conditioning our bodies in such a way to avoid injury by giving ourselves the range of motion that, whether we want to or not, one day we might need. So thank you guys very much, and I hope you enjoy CombatCon's virtual convention this year.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. And was it bad that I heard a lot of crunching when I was doing the shoulder rolls?
No, that's normal actually. And people,
Okay.
I love that one because people just aren't used to feeling those muscles fire individually.
Question for you. We had a few in the chat, but this has been up a lot in the last couple of days. What's your take on intensity of warm-up stretching? I've seen people say it's got to be super intense, heavy warm-up to get yourself a sweat going. Some say light, some say go right into an activity cold.
So the history of flexibility in science is full of contradictions. I think where you need to draw lines again between flexibility and pliability. When we talk about these things, we actually have three. We have active flexibility, passive flexibility, and general pliability. For pliability, doing the move when you're already warmed up is not particularly useful because what you're trying to do is increase your range of motion when you are cold. For passive flexibility, being warmed up is really, really helpful. The more those muscles have blood going to them, the more relaxed they are, the more they're willing to stretch. For active flexibility, you don't want to wear yourself out first because active flexibility is about actually clenching other muscles in your body in order to pull other joints apart. So to do that, if you're worn out to begin with, you're not really going to get a decent active flexibility increase. So it really depends on what your goals are. And that depends a lot on what the ultimate activity you're trying to achieve is. So I would say I can't really answer it too specifically without knowing what your specific activity and goal is. So talk to your trainer.
Cool. Thank you very much. There were a couple of new questions. I think one question that came up in the chat was around modifying the split stretch for someone that is prone to muscle cramps.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, eat bananas. They're good for you. Second of all, if you're prone to cramp, don't ever feel bad bailing out of a stretch. So if you're getting a little bit of muscle shake and muscle spasm, that's one thing. If you're cramping, go ahead and swing out from it and deal with that cramp. So number one, I would say cramps aren't something to push through the pain on. Go ahead and handle that. Also, the thing about this is I stretch like a circus person, but this is something where you can just, if you're just back here, that's fine. If you're back here, that's also fine. So it's a matter of finding that level for you. And in that way, it's sort of a self-modifying stretch. If you can't go past here without firing that cramp, don't go past here until your body adjusts. So stretching is something that is shockingly genetic. And some people just have an easier time of it than others. The great thing about that split stretch is that you really don't have to push it to get results. So long as you're feeling the stretch every time, you're going to get those results honestly faster than you expect. It's a miracle stretch.
Cool. Thank you so much. That was awesome. I'll put it out there. Anybody that is listening in or sees this after the fact, if you have other questions, please post them in the chat. And I'll put up some links as well. And do you want to plug out before you go?
No, sorry, my kitty was coming in.
Okay.
Sure. So again, I'm Morgana Alba, and you can find me on Facebook. My company is Circus Siren Entertainment. And I will be putting in, I don't normally do virtual classes, but I will be putting in the chat a different circus fitness instructor that you can follow that you can follow and that I highly recommend if you're looking for more in-home training.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Cool. Appreciate it. All right.
Yep.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
All right. That was amazing. Let me drop you off there. So, that was awesome. I hope everybody had a chance to get out and do that. And if you didn't, replay it and go do it because it's a great, it was a great workout and incredibly taxing. I did try some of it here while we're in the room. So let's move on. We're going to go through a video now of Maestro Paul Mcdonald from CombatCon 2016. It's a great video. Maestro Mcdonald owns and runs both a school and an armory, and he talks about both of that in the video, producing and training with edged weapons and non-edged weapons as well. And in this video, Paul talks a lot about the community that is CombatCon and the ties that kind of bring us together. So let me load that up for us here. And as always, please make sure that, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. If you have any thing you'd like to cover, anything you want to see, definitely pop it in as well. And remember to go to the link that's out there. So let me get this shared for us so we can watch Paul present.
I'm Paul Mcdonald. I run Mcdonald Armories and the Mcdonald Academy of Arms in Edinburgh, Scotland. I'm here, well, having a good time, primarily. That's the focus, but yeah, I have a little stand here with some of the wares, some of the babies that I craft at Mcdonald Armories, and yeah, here teaching some classes as well on military combatives, knife work, and traditional Highland backsword. Well, there's a lot to be excited about here. It's a pretty amazing place, but the folk who attend CombatCon, the mix of folk and characters that you get coming together is pretty special. It's great to catch up with a lot of friends, a lot of real, friends, very genuine friends that you've known for years and share a lot of the same passions. That's always a great thing. To meet new folk as well and share ideas and inspiration together. So yeah, it's a special place to be. Well, you can run into all forms of life here, but all in a good way. There's so much, there's so much interest shared, whether it's through history, through movies, through steel, and a love of weaponry and that side of the history too. Yeah, everybody has something in common here, and it all comes from the heart. So you can find all sorts of all ages as well. It's quite fascinating. If you don't take any steps forward, you're never going to get to interest in new places, So yeah, CombatCon. If you're not sure as to what you might expect here, just dive in, and yeah, you'll find something new for sure. You'll find something that will engage you in some way, in a very positive way. Why do we fight? Conflict is inherent in the nature of this world, I believe, and the nature of ourselves. We are all familiar with it in our own personal battles, our own personal clashes and turmoils along the path of life, and the expression of combat is, there's so many variations of that worldwide that you can find a lot of classes in here. Yeah, it's very engaging. It's really very instantly engaging to most people in life. They can associate with combat and conflict in some way, and that and the variations that you find in weaponry and techniques and methods, movement, is almost infinite really, and so it's great to compare, contrast, and learn something new, not just about the weapons but really about yourself. You're really spoiled for choice at this event. There are so many instructors, so many high-level instructors now teaching so many really interesting weapon forms and concepts. It's difficult to choose. Really, whatever you would be most engaged with yourself and most interested in, it's going to be the best thing for you. Every weapon form certainly is its own dialect within the language of fencing and conflict. So they all have their own character, and I enjoy a lot of these characters. It's very difficult for me to say and pick and choose a favourite, but the weapon I most associate with and I most train with and teach is the basket-hilted backsword or broadsword. That was the main frontline weapon of the Highlanders through all the Jacobite risings. So it's very personal, and it's associated with the conflict from Scotland, from where I'm from. There's a huge amount of heritage being seen here, being taught here, being imparted. The sword has been, firearms have really only been a frontline weapon in fairly recent history. For centuries before that, the sword was the frontline weapon. It was such a personal item as well. It was part of you in your life as you carried that and as you may have used that along life too. Yeah, the sword used to literally carry the spirit and soul of a man with him. So yeah, these are intimately associated with us and with where we come from. We all come from a long line of people. We all come from various cultures and histories, and the sword has undoubtedly been a part of all our histories. The motto of the Academy of Arms is in fence as in life as in fence. You learn the same lessons in combat and in swordsmanship as you do in life. There's great parallels there. And And so, yeah, I think it's one of the best things about this event is, yeah, you're not just learning about shiny things, you will come away learning a lot more, or something at least, about yourself, and that's invaluable.
Cool. That was awesome. I think I first saw Mr. Mcdonald and Jared will have to keep me honest on this one because my memory's fading because I'm old. Was at a Grand Assault Arms back in like the late 90s, early 2000s in New York. But again, I might be misremembering. I've never had an opportunity to take a class, but that is on the top of my list for 2021 CombatCon, is to be a part of one of his classes. I really can't wait for that, and that would just be the highlight for me for the weekend. Cool. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. There are other interviews. We're going to show more throughout the rest of the week, but there are absolutely others up on the CombatCon YouTube channel. So please make sure to take a look. Scroll down a bit through the list. There's a ton of great content up there. And these are about probably 2/3 of the way down in the video list, but there are some great interviews and just some real good insight and some just amazing content, right? So take a look. Cool. Let's keep rolling. I hope everybody's having a good time. We got a good group out there. Thank you for all the posts again. Thank you for Morgana again for coming out and doing the segment earlier. That was awesome. There are some additional links in the chat that she's posted for those that want to kind of follow up and do more in that space. I know I'm going to, and I'm going to push my guys here to do that as well. We do that rollout as part of our openings stretching routine for all of our classes. So it's a great it's a great tool to have in the toolbox. We'll do those things. So our next content segment is a recorded video from Richard Marsden. Richard's the founder, along with John Patterson, of the Phoenix Society for Historical Swordsmanship. He's a HEMA Alliance instructor certification and has taught numerous events throughout the USA and Canada. Richard was president of the HEMA Alliance and is currently a member of its general council. He holds a bachelor's degree in education with a focus on history and a master's degree in military studies, specializing in land warfare. I'll put Richard's personal page up in our chat. It's www.worksofrichardmarsden.com. In this video, Richard compares Italian and German longsword traditions. So really interesting, very real great video. I know you guys will like it. So let me get that loaded for us and we'll get things rolling. So give me 1 second here again. Thank you everybody for your patience, and I appreciate all the feedback and comments. This is actually really excited about this. I'm glad we're able to do this. So take a look at this. Let me know what you think, and I'll come back on shortly.
Hi, my name is Richard Marsden of the Phoenix Society of Historical Swordsmanship, and I was asked to do a video on the differences between German and Italian longsword. Sorry I can't do a virtual interview. I'm a school teacher, and we just found out this week we have a lot of work to do. So getting this video out and a couple pictures for you guys before I go to my endless meetings about the new school year. So with that out of the way, let's define our terms. Is there a German sword, longsword style? And the answer is yes. Is there an Italian? Yes. But let's go a little bit deeper. The first thing is we have to look at, well, what is German? What is Italian? The country of Germany did not exist in the time period that we'll be looking at. Italy didn't either. Instead, we have two different entities that existed from which our longsword material comes out of. On the German side, our main source would be Lichtenauer and his Zettel, followed by a bunch of students and follow-up guys. And in Italy, it was Fiore di Liberi, and we'll talk about his follow-ups a little bit later. But what was the countries that they were from, or the nations, or the states, or whatever you want to call them? So in the case of German, there was a place called the Holy Roman Empire, which Voltaire wittily said is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And what it was is a loose alliance of German states. And these German states had free cities, little kind of petty kingdoms, powerful electors, and these electors would nominate an emperor to kind of rule over them. And this emperor often found that becoming the Holy Roman Emperor was a poison chalice, because you end up inheriting essentially a disobedient people, if you ask Charles V. So they do speak German. They do have a sense of German culture. The borders are not rigid like we have today, right? They're more loose, but people still recognized German and Germanness, and the sword fighting, the longsword material in particular we'll be looking at, is German. On the Italian side, Italy was a part of the Holy Roman Empire, kind of, at least parts of it were in theory, but the reality is that the emperor rarely crossed the Alps, usually just to get crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, and then he'd take off again. So the Italians are mostly left to their own devices, and they too refer to nationhood and being a country and being Italian, and yet it's terribly divided. You know, it won't be unified until the 1860s. What it was divided into was a series of city-states or small kingdoms, petty kingdoms, that competed with one another during the 13, 14, and 1500s, until eventually power politics would draw in larger nations like France and the Holy Roman Empire and Spain. So that's kind of the region that we're looking at. Both had martial cultures. The Germans, for example, were conducting judicial duels well into the 1400s, where you could sort of challenge a case through right of combat. The Italians, although they kind of got rid of judicial dueling, they still had these very public displays of duels of honor, which you could get killed in, but generally not. All right, when we look at, so now we got the idea of like, okay, who the players are, right? There is a German, there's no Germany, but there are Germans, right? There's no Italy, but there are Italians. And the source material we're looking at is written in the appropriate language. So from Lichtenauer, it's in German, and Fiore stuff's written in the form of Italian. Okay, cool. So time period. We're looking at generally the late 1300s for the start of this material. And for the German stuff, it goes all the way to, I mean, there is images of guys with fetters kind of doing like longsword stuff, I think even in the 1700s. Like, it kind of goes a long, long time. Fiore dies out much quicker. So let's talk about our first differences. Why? Why? So on Fiore's case, he kind of tells us who he is. He is a fencing master, right? He's the son of an imperial knight. And he says he traveled at great expense to learn from Germans and Italians, and probably a bunch of others, his techniques. And it wasn't just longsword. His works were complete, including like wrestling and dagger and sword in one hand and spear and poleaxe and mounted combat and armored combat and so on. And he said, hey, one of my students said something along the lines of, like, you can't memorize all this stuff, so you need to learn from books. And he said, what a good idea. I want to write a book that kind of puts down my thoughts on how to be a good sword fighter, right? Or a good overall martial artist. Who are his students? Elite dudes. He is not teaching to scrubs, that's for sure. He's teaching to guys who were condottieri, mercenary captains of their own, who had troops and commanded and probably already knew a lot about combat. He's teaching kind of to experts, right? Preparing them for duels. These duels of honor that were done in public, that were very expensive, lots of pageantry, in which you probably aren't going to die. Fighting in the barriers, he calls it, right? Of himself, he says, hey, I trained many students. He names just, some. He says, I taught in secret. That was kind of important. A lot of his techniques he did not want to get out. And he says, don't teach the peasants. He wanted to keep it a secret. He says, some fought in the barriers, some did not. And then of himself, he says, hey, I fought 5 duels without armor, right? Just wearing my jacket and my gloves, and came away with my honor unscathed. So we know, a little bit about Fiore just from himself, and researchers have done some work on him, and says, okay, yeah, he was this sort of fencing master, possibly mercenary commander of his own, that was catering to the elite. And this may be why Fiore's work doesn't continue on and on and on like we do with the German material. He was writing to a rather specific and tiny audience that actually is getting smaller as history went on, not larger. Of his works, there are 4 that we'll be looking at very briefly. These 4 are 4 manuscripts that are called the Flower of Battle. They're 4 copies. and each one's a little bit different. The Getty is the one that most people use, called MS Ludwig. That one it's the most complete. It has plenty of pictures and plenty of easy to understand text. All right, and it's dedicated to Nicola d'Este, one of the kind of petty princes of the region. All right? Okay, and when he writes this stuff, he does mention it should be done in secret, and he shows tons of techniques, and we'll get more into those a little bit later. So let's hop back to the German side. Well, where does their stuff start from, right? Well, Lichtenauer may not have existed. Like, we don't really know anything about the dude, right? We know that we have this piece of poetry attributed to him, but that's about as far as it goes, right? And this piece of poetry it's a Zettel, and it explains the German style and approach to the fight with, we'll be looking at the longsword. What makes it unusual is that the Zettel is not something that's easy to understand. If you look at Fury's, the Getty, for example, there will be a block of text that you can piece together today fairly easily. It's not rocket science. You look at the Zettel, and I were just to fling up a phrase. If you didn't know what was going on, it would just be kind of gobbledygook, right? So what do we do with this thing? Well, luckily, there was a society of students that came after Lichtenauer, the Society of Lichtenauer, these masters, and we have some of their materials, and they have these things called glosses. There are also those who are not connected to the society that are still sort of using the same terminology and material and approach to sword fighting. So there's like this German style out there, right? And these glosses explain the Zettel. They're like, oh, this is what he wants you to do. Oh, this is what he wants you to do, right? So by piecing together the glosses, we can understand the Zettel better, right? What makes the German system more interesting to me is that it keeps going, right? Fiore doesn't really have a follow-up, right? He's a guy called Vadi, picked up Fiore's work, doesn't cite him by name, but copies some of his works. But when Vadi writes his material, he actually says in his introduction, I'm coming up with something new, right? He mentions the masters of old, which he's probably referring to Fiore, but he says, I'm going to come up with something new, right? So he's not really carrying on the traditions of Fiore, he's just sort of modifying and tweaking it into his own style. And there's no indication that he's like a student Fiore or anything like that. When it comes to the guys on the German side, the early KDF, Kunsteffekten is what they call it, it continues on and on and on and on. And it starts being carried through to masters who are given permission to teach. They form guilds, like the Marksburger Guild. And they're given permission to sort of teach and hold Festschools. Now, Festschule is like a place where you train, like your HEMA club, but it's also where they held sort of like almost like weekly tournaments, right, with a variety of weapons, including a longsword. That doesn't mean like the German longsword material was just for the sporting context. I'm showing a broad window of things. It started off probably for judicial dueling or self-defense or just knightly combat, but over time it became a part of the Festschule, right, where it was done by these schools all the way into the I think even 1700s, and we have lots of material from it, including Mayer and Meyer from the 1500s. We don't really have that with Fiore. You could look at Marozzo and say, hey, this is Italian, longsword, but there's no connection to Fiore that we see. When we look at stuff from like Meyer or Mayer, the terms they use, the phrases they use, the techniques they use, that goes all the way back to early KDF. So we see like there's this line, right, that we just don't have with the Italians. The Germans lasted longer, which means that a lot more material to work with and learn and read. What's really neat about the German stuff is if you find something in early KDF that doesn't make sense, well, then you can jump to the 16th century and read about it and say, well, what were they doing with it? And maybe learn about it that way, right? You can't really do that with Fiore very easily. You have to kind of use what you got. And you can piece and pull things together, but there isn't this tradition that continues on and on and on. And part of it is the audience. Fiore's audience are specific dudes, right? They're specific guys that he's kind of writing to, and it was meant for a small elite society. With the German material, it later transitions to these guilds, right? And these guilds were teaching, we think, an urban middle class who wrote a lot of stuff down, and it was a growing class, right? So the audience kind of grew. And again, lasted well into what we would call the early modern era. Okay, so now you get kind of an idea of like who the audiences are and how the manuscripts are different. What about actual presentation? Well, as I said, the Zettel is done in a poem, and then the glosses are sort of explanations for it. You can find more art the later you go, but the original KGF stuff doesn't really have any art, right? Very little. Fiore is different. It's very visual. Actually, he teaches visually. And his book, he tells you in the beginning how he's going to teach. He says, listen, I'm going to show you guys with crowns. These guys are masters that are in like a guard position. And then I'm going to show you other guys with crowns, and they are doing a technique of some sort, like the start of one. Then I'm going to show you guys with a garter on their leg. These are students doing what the master tells them to do, and he shows quite a few of them. And then from time to time, he'll show a guy with a crown and a garter, and this guy is countering a technique. And then occasionally there's counter to counters, but don't worry about that. So what we have is masters, students, and then the occasional counter master, all visually displayed. And in the case of MS Ludwig, plenty of text from which to work and say, okay, here's what's going on. The German stuff's a little different, right? Terminology obviously is different as well. Fiore has a variety of Italian terms that he uses to describe things. The Germans have their own terms, which would be carried on through centuries, right? With Fiore stuff, not so much. Again, it kind of probably ends with him, or doesn't go much farther that we know of. So there's a difference there, right? The other differences we would see is preference of techniques, right? So when we look at the German material, for example, there are 4 sort of primary guards, four ways to hold the longsword. These aren't the only ways. There's actually a lot more, but 4 kind of primary ones. And they're plow, which is kind of low by the kind of the hip, Alber, the fool, which is brought down before you, Vom Tag, which is kind of on the shoulder, and then we have ox, kind of an extended blade. And we can look at these, like, because art is eventually drawn of it, and we can look at them, and we can look at it from a variety of sources, from different masters and different artists, and get an idea of, like, okay, here's kind of what Vom Tag looks like. There's lots of options, right? And here's what ox kind of looks like. And here's what maybe ox looked like in the 1400s, but here's what it looks like in the mid-1500s. So we can kind of compare the two, right? Fiore, we have a lot less to work with. We have his 4 surviving manuscripts, right? We have that, so we can look at that and compare how things are done when it goes to his guards, of which he has a lot more. He doesn't have like 4 primary guards to work from. He has like 12, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. Vadi can be considered, I guess, as a kind of a follow-up to Fiore, and he shows art as well, but it's kind of crude. And that's kind of about it, when it comes to Fiore, of art that we have to work with, right? With a few exceptions. So there's a difference there. When it comes to guards, as I said, the Germans have their 4 primary guards, which if you're into KDF or Meyer, you know those 4 by heart, right? They're kind of the principal guards. Fiore, a little different. He shows a lot of different guards. Case in point, he has his version of Vom Tag is called Woman's Guard, and it looks different. His hands are pulled back, kind of like what we call the Meyer Rath Guard, away, so that you can't really target his hands. And he shows different varieties of how to do that. Leaning forward, leaning back, on the left, on the right, high above the head, right? Showing different options, right? So so when we say Fiore's got a lot of guards, sometimes they're just variations of the same guard, right? He doesn't have an ox like the Germans exactly. Like he has one that's more retracted to keep his hands safe. And there's different people who interpret how it's done. Is it point forward? Is it kind of off to the side? That's up to you how you do your interpretation. But it looks, different than the ox. He has a breve point, which is kind of low, and it's different than the Flug. German Flug, they have a lot of stuff that you can fight unarmored with, and techniques you can do from the Flug. Fiore, doesn't really say much about his guards. They're very brief, but he does say of his low guard close to the hip, he says, oh, this one's better in armor. Probably because he just wants to stab a guy and not cut him, right? There's a guard that's low called Iron Door. It's a middle iron door, and it's similar to Albert the Fool. What they do from these guards, though, are different. Fiore gives you some insights. They're actually pretty brief, and then he has plays later, techniques, and he doesn't really always tell you like how to get to these plays. I assume once the crossing of the blade happens, however it happens, how you should perform these plays. The German stuff's a little bit different. It will say, hey, from the Fool, try this when your opponent does something. And if you go to Meyer takes it even further. He says, if he does this, do that. But if he does this, do that. Like, he really takes it on and on and on. Fiore doesn't, all right? He usually just says, If your opponent does this, you do that, and that's it. All right, with a few exceptions. He doesn't talk a lot about combos. I think maybe one. So there's a little bit of difference there of how they hold their swords and how the instructions are given on how to use them. What about other differences? When we look at other differences, let's look at the thrust. So one of the things that you hear is like, hey, Germans were not keen on thrusting. Well, the kind of the argument is comes from something that Meyer mentions about like, hey, we Germans really don't thrust one another, but you need to know how to do it because certain outsiders do, and he's probably referring to the Italians. There is some truth to that, in that when you stab a person in the past, because medical care is what it is, people tended to die, and when you cut a person, well, they could possibly live. We see this in Polish literature where they talk about like, you don't stab fellow Poles. You stab people in warfare, but you just cut each other up and you'll survive. The Germans seem to be doing something very similar. We're like, hey man, you don't stab a guy. That's crazy. You can cut him, sure, but don't stab him. The Italians, they said, oh, forget that. We're stabbing each other, right? They developed a whole weapon system based on the thrust, which they got, criticized for. They're like, wow, these Italians are really murderous. We're just settling disagreements with one another. We're being, we're at risk. We're probably not going to die. These Italians, once they start stabbing each other, they're going to die, and that's influencing the rest of us. So when they say, hey, Germans don't stab, well, they're aware of the thrust, right? Meyer teaches how to use a rapier, for example, and shows you how to stab with it. Clearly, they knew how to stab with a longsword, but culturally, you weren't really supposed to. But if you go back to early KDF, it seems to be a bit more mortal in that they don't care if you do stab, right? They give you techniques on how to do it. Okay, so that kind of covers the similarities and differences with the thrusts. How about techniques themselves, like specific techniques? Well, there'll be differences, but sometimes they do the same thing. Case in point, in the German system, there's something called an Absetzen, where you sort of set aside somebody's thrust in exchange for your own, so that they're trying to stab you, and you either cut or push or move it aside, do some footwork, and you stab the opponent, and they don't stab you. Fury does the same thing, right? He does the same thing. He calls it an exchange of the thrust, where an opponent's trying to stab you, you move it off the side, you do some footwork, and you stab the opponent, and he doesn't stab you. The imagery that they show is different, but the concept is the same, right? The Germans have these things called Meisterhaus, or hidden strikes, or master strikes. And they're ways to sort of break guards. They're like, hey, if someone is in this guard, you can do this technique, and it'll defeat it. Fury doesn't really quite have that. That would be a difference between the two when it comes to techniques. Fury generally says, here's my guards. He briefly describes how to cut. Right? He does talk about you can break guards, but doesn't really show it. And then he shows a lot of like, hey, our swords are crossed at the tips, the middle, and the close. Here's what we do. Right? Germans are a little bit different. They have some pretty specific techniques. If a guy's in this position, do that. Other differences is the actual approach to the fight itself. So Fiore doesn't explicitly say, hey, when you're approaching a fight, you should be seeking to like gain control over it. Right? He doesn't say anything like that. It's all implied, and as a historian, you guys have to sort of interpret it on your own. What Fury does show is he seems to show a lot of techniques in which he likes to counterfight, where he is leaned back, he's kind of retracted, or he's waiting, and he doesn't mind being attacked, because my interpretation is he understands if I know where I'm being attacked from, I kind of am in control of the fight. If I lean far back and I force my opponent to cut deep, then I know what he's doing, and I can do things to counter that, right? If my sword is off to the side in what we call a boar's tooth, and I'm inviting my head to be attacked, it's something he was used to do in tournaments all the time, and my opponent throws an attack at me, I can deflect, do the right footwork, hopefully, and strike my opponent, right? And I'm waiting for them. It's a very classic Fury thing. The Germans are a little different. They talk about, like, hey, if he's in this guard, do these sort of master strikes. You have this thing called the Vor, which is like the initiative in the fight. You want to seize that and control it. And in the moment, the Indies, you want to kind of act. If you're behind the game, right, you're trying to counterfighting, you're fighting in the knock, you're fighting in the after. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, you can, but you want to, like, regain the Vor, right? Don't take this as, if you're German, you just have to run into a fight as quick as you can and attack first. That's not really what they're saying. But there is, like, a strategy of, like, hey, if you are the one attacking, then things are going pretty well for you. All right, you know, especially if you're attacking the right time and the right distance. Where Fury doesn't mind being attacked at all, right? There's no caution of like, hey, don't let them go first, right? He seems to not mind. Fury breaks up the fight in that here's guards, and then here's what happens at the wide measure where he just shows a couple of things. Sort of the middle measure where he shows a bit more. Labeled all as wide measure, but he shows tips and middle crossings. And then he shows a lot of stuff from the close. Right? The Germans are a little bit different in that, right? So a little difference there. When it comes to plays when you're actually closing with one another, there's differences, techniques that you see in the German tradition that you could interpret from Fury but don't necessarily see. So a good example is Durchlaufen. The two German opponents will come together, their blades kind of bind high, right? They're pushed up, and one guy's like, aha, and he takes the sword in one hand, and with his free hand, he kind of does a hip throw to the opponent, right? In Fury's, when he shows his close plays, he doesn't really show that. You could maybe look at his wrestling and say, well, he shows it in the wrestling, couldn't I kind of attribute it to the longsword section? He wants you to, so yes, but you have to like make that connection. Okay, so there'll be different close plays techniques, right? Fury likes to smash teeth out with his pommel. And German shows some pommeling as well, but Fury really seems to like it. Fury likes to grab the sword. There's quite a few where he'll like, ha, caught your sword, right? Because if it's not moving, it's not dangerous, right? And I don't see a ton of that with the German stuff. You'll see them grab their own swords and half sword, but not a lot of grabbing the opponent's blade. Other differences would be certain things that the Germans focus on that the Italians don't clearly. Winding. So two German blades, two fighters, their blades cross, and one move in one direction from the other, each trying to find like an angle to cut or stab from. They're doing these like 8 windings, right? 8 different ways you can kind of move the sword from across and win. Fury doesn't explicitly say here's how to wind. You can interpret it, you know, and some people do. But what he generally shows is like, oh, you're at a cross, do some of these things. Another little difference would be that Fury's work, the Flower of Battle, is supposed to be taken as a complete whole. You can just read the longsword section and become a fairly good fighter, but you are missing out because when we look at the Flower of Battle, it covers, you know, wrestling, dagger, and a bunch of stuff, but it all informs each other, right? You have to kind of read the whole book to really get the best out of longsword out of it. Like, well, how so? I'll give you an example. In a sword in one hand section, he says, hey, when you come to the close, the cross, you can sort of grab this guy's hand and twist it, very similar to a dagger play that you see. And then he actually calls one out. He says you can also put them in a middle bind, which I showed you in like the third dagger master, or third dagger play earlier in the book, right? So he makes some direct references. And you can find some longsword material hidden in places you may not expect. It's in the mounted section at some point, which is kind of the end of the Getty, where he says something along the lines of like, hey, when blades are crossed at the tip, the action happens quickly, and in the middle, slower, and at the guard, slowest. Right? That would have been great in the longsword section, but it's tossed over into mounted. His spear section is incredibly short. Like, if you want to become like a Fury spear master, there's like only like six plays, I think, maybe. And some of them are just replicated one another. There's not much to it. Because the way I interpret it is, if you understand the exchange of the thrust, then you already know kind of how to use a spear, right? It's just playing off of that technique plus some more, right? When it comes to the poleaxe, he doesn't even show a lot of attacks with the poleaxe. He shows that you're already crossed up and kind of what to do. Probably because he says, hey, if you know how to use woman's guard and break a thrust or attack, you already know how to do it, right? So there's a little bit of difference, is how he approaches it. Fury shows some weird stuff, too, that the Germans don't. And what I mean by weird stuff is Fury has an example of poison powder to blind the opponent, right? That's a bit unusual. He shows some odd stuff like how to fight with tree branches, which you get in Mayer, but you're not going to get in a lot of the other German sources, right? How to fight with like a walking staff or dagger versus sword and things like that. So little differences there. What they both approach differently, and this kind of or similar, is the Germans have a separate kind of section for armor fighting. They understood that armor fighting and out of armor, in and out of armor is a little different. Fury does as well. He says a lot of his plays work in and out of armor. He says they're fine, but he does have an entire section just for armored combat in his source material. Right? Okay, so got about 4 minutes left in this half-hour video, so let's kind of bring it all around. We have German and Italian source material, right? We have a German tradition that lasts a lot longer, therefore there's more ink spilled and more to read and look and watch and learn from. The Italian, we have a lot less. We have them both using similar weapon systems roughly around the same time. We have similar techniques from some, but not identical, right? We have probably a different approach to the fight from the Lichtenauer tradition, the KDF tradition, than we do from Fiore's, right? Fiore, I would say, is a counter fighter at heart, right? At least he seems to spend a lot of time on that. While on the KDF side, I think they really want to shut someone down as quick as they can, right? This is my interpretation of it. Not the only interpretation, but mine. So there's that. The other thing, too, is you'll hear a phrase from people that, like, in martial arts often, it's like there's only so many ways the human body moves. And so all martial arts are very similar. Yeah, that's true, right? There is only so many ways the human body moves. But your preferences do matter, right? Otherwise, there'd be just one martial art, right? There would be Longsword, the final, right? And it isn't that way. Masters have their preferences, right? The KDF tradition has its preferences. The later KDF stuff, the Meyer stuff, has its preferences, right? For various reasons. And Fiore, and we only have him to work with, has his own preferences, right? Vadi, who followed up, actually says, hey, I'm kind of discarding some of this stuff and coming with my new ideas. So think of it as that, like, they will share a lot of common ground, but they won't be identical, right? And you can definitely learn a lot from reading both. Okay, so that gives you kind of a quick summary of German versus Italian, and hopefully you can do some research on your own and kind of see for yourself how they are similar and different, right? Just quick visual perusal will start making connections for you. And what's really neat is when you start looking at both source material, you'll learn some cool stuff. So example, Fiore shows a boar's tooth. It's a blade off to the side where you deflect an opponent's attack and then strike him back. And I always thought it was a distinctly Italian thing. But later I was reading some German material, I can't even remember what it was, and that same technique is in there. It's described a little differently, but it's doing the same thing, like the sweeping technique followed by a play back. So I'm like, oh, it's the same, right? Just taught differently. So I hope that you go on a similar journey. So my name is Richard Marsden from the Phoenix Society of Historical Swordsmanship. It's been a lovely half hour, and I look forward to reading your comments and seeing what you guys think about the differences between the German and Italian systems, if we're okay using those terms.
All right. Thank you, Richard. That was awesome. Appreciate it. And as I said, please take a look, sorry, shiny object got me a little crazy there. Post any comments you have, any questions you have. Richard will be monitoring and checking out the chat. We will put this video up on the YouTube channel as well. And of course, it'll be on Richard's site for future reference, as well as in Facebook here. So with that, I'm gonna go into gallery view here and say hello to Rocket. How are you?
Hello, I'm very good. How are you?
Good, thanks. So we're gonna continue the fun we had last night with Jared and Tim, which was a blast, and meet with Kristen Kalberg, who is the CombatCon Director of Finance and Public Relations. So let's just preface it for a little bit here, right? We're going to do this every night for folks out there. We're going to have a different officer and a member of the leadership team from CombatCon come on and chat with us a little bit. I'm trying to break it up, do different questions for everybody. So it's not the same thing every night. So sorry if you're prepared. We're going to do different questions. And you know, I'll say, and I'm going to say this every night, right? These folks do an amazing job putting on CombatCon. There's so much stuff behind the scenes that I know I've only had scratched the surface on learning about. And it's just like, wow, yeah, wow, it's awesome to make our experience as attendees and instructors that are instructing and fighters and everything else just such a seamless, from registration all the way out through, you know, closing ceremonies. So I thank you guys very much for doing that and being there and putting this on. So thank you for joining tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for all the work that you've put into Preview Week. You've been absolutely amazing. So thank you as well.
Cool. Well, thank you. This is a blast. I'm having a good time. So I'm glad we're here doing this. So if you don't mind, can you take a few minutes, tell us how you started with CombatCon, a bit of your journey maybe?
Sure. So I met Jared and a few of our other main CombatCon instructors that have kind of been here since the beginning. In 2013 at Jared's New York Intensive for Stage and Screen. That was 2013. And then I couldn't afford to spend a week in New York City again, but I didn't want to lose what I had started to learn. So I ended up at CombatCon in 2014 as a volunteer, again, because I was broke. So it was a really great experience. I volunteered mostly behind the reg desk, and I haven't really left since. So it's been a fun journey, just getting more involved every year. I think you are muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
That always happens. I'm on video calls all day, every day, and inevitably somebody goes, "You're muted." I'm sorry. And that was way before Zoom too. So I'm just classically horrible that way. So Director of Finance and Participant Relations, those are two very different things, right? Some are behind the scenes, some's very much, the money and the people, so to speak, right? Challenge to balance that.
So you don't usually think of, money and people going well together. Those are usually two completely separate departments. But I found that the more I wanted to help, the more information I was always trying to claw from Tim and Jared. So eventually they said, you know what? Just run the email, and then you'll have all the information that you need for the most part. So the participant relations is definitely more, following along with any of the emails that come into info@CombatCon, and, just responding with, little bits of information or forwarding it to other people or getting information from somebody else. So that's a main part of my job, and that is throughout the entire year. And then along with that, and then kind of on the money side too, is that for 2014 through 2017, 2018, I was literally behind the reg desk almost the entire time. So people knew that they could come and ask questions, and if there was something that needed to be addressed, they knew that they could come to the reg desk and get access to somebody immediately to handle or listen to whatever was needed to be said. But since I was behind the reg desk, I was also handling registrations and the money that involves with that. I only handle incoming money. I don't handle outgoing money. So if you need money from someone, it's not me.
Nice. Awesome. It's funny. I asked Jared and Tim for a fond memory last night, and they kind of struggled with finding one, right? There was a ton of them. And I think that, we talked about it, and Mr. Mcdonald talked about the community that is CombatCon earlier in his video, right? It seems to be the recurring theme. And how would you describe the world that has become CombatCon? Because it is very near and dear to all of us, and it's a very special thing. So
yes, I call the people of CombatCon, I call them my sword family or my chosen family. Just it's such a great community. There's definitely the oddballs. I mean, we're all oddballs in some way, to really be into this group and this community. But I just love how we are growing and bringing more people in, but like the right type of people. If somebody doesn't really fit the fold, they just kind of find their own way out, which is, it's kind of rough to say that, but at the same time, that you're getting a tight group that you can depend on. I remember back in 2014, some people were approached after hours by someone not involved in the convention whatsoever, and this guy was just not leaving these girls alone. And other CombatCon family recognized, like, hey, I know these people, they're part of the convention, I saw them earlier, and they masked around them, and everybody was looking out for each other, but they were complete strangers, but they were part of the family. So hearing stories about that has just been really great to bring everybody together and look out for each other. Just lots and lots of really good stories. But yes, I would consider CombatCon my family.
Awesome. And I'm glad to be a part of it. In the small part that I can be, I'm glad.
Careful, you're going to get promoted.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm a glutton for punishment, right? Always looking for something else to do. My wife hates that, but I am, unfortunately. So talking about attendees, we got the content's out here for everyone, whether they've come to the event or haven't, or thinking about it or not. Any tips or tricks that you would offer to a past or potential attendee and how they can optimize their experience when they come out?
Oh,
I love putting you guys on the spot like
right.
this.
I would say just branch out. You know, if you're coming from an area, like for me, I did stage combat. So I wanted to originally take, you know, a stage combat class from an instructor that I had never had a class from before, but that was well known in the industry. But at the same time, I wanted to learn so many other things and get a taste of so many other things that weren't available in my area. So it was just, I would definitely say drink lots of water.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else there for a second, but that's okay.
Drink lots of water, get the food that you need, you know, preferably not on the convention floor.
New rule.
Hopefully. Yes, we did fix part of that. Anyway, just for anybody that's concerned. So, you know, just be in it for the long haul. You're going to miss some stuff. Go talk to that person, that instructor that you've always wanted to talk to. Just walk up, talk to them. You know, everybody's very open. Reach out to see if anybody wants to share a hotel room. Obviously do that, you know, in a safe manner. But I remember my first CombatCon, I reached out to the volunteer coordinator at the time and I said, hey, again, I'm traveling to Vegas on a budget. Do any of the other volunteers need a hotel buddy? And she paired me with someone super great. We had a great time. I had never met this person before. We hung out and, you know, that was 2014 and we're still, you know, in touch today, which is awesome. Cool. So just meeting a lot of new people and branching out has been really great.
Nice. So two other questions for you, if you don't mind. If you had the magic pen, right, that allowed you to write the future, what would you write? We'll limit it to CombatCon, but you know.
Fair. First, that there is no global pandemic by the time Onsite 2021 comes around. That would be very helpful. Hello.
Hey, Sarah.
So first of all, that, and then secondly, just to find the next, you know, the next group to bring on into the fold. As Jared and Tim mentioned, adding TSL was amazing. You know, they've been such a great addition to the CombatCon family and have helped us branch out into even more things. So that's been really great. Very
cool. So last thing. Okay. And, you know, we've got some interesting ones from Jared and Tim yesterday, and I'm writing them down. So I want to see, right, what's that? So let's close with a cliffhanger, right? Give us that. That's a story for another time. Quote.
I would say our story for another time is why we always ask who else is contracted to be in or near our space at our venue.
Okay. That's definitely a teaser. All right, cool. Thank you so much. This was awesome. I appreciate it. And we got some great feedback out there. So please take a look at the chat as well. But thank you for joining. I appreciate it. And Sarah, thank you for joining as well. But Rocket, thank you.
All right. I will see you later. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks. Cheers. All right. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So this is the folks out there. Thank you everybody for staying with us. I'm glad you guys are still all here. We've got some great content to close out the night with. Dr. Sarah Lewis is with us now. Let me give us a quick intro here and we'll get the video. I'll let you tee up the video while I get it rolling. So Sarah Lewis has a doctorate in neuroscience and is currently working as a scientist studying movement disorders. She has over 20 years experience practicing and teaching Italian rapier. In the past 4 years, she's been training with the Phoenix Society for Historical Swordsmanship, and she's been creating a series of videos on how to use science to improve teaching HEMA, and that can be found on their YouTube channel. So, Sarah, thank you again for joining us and introducing your video for us here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Tom.
Cool.
So I originally came up with the idea of doing a series of neuroscience-focused videos for HEMA while I was doing background reading, figuring out how children learn to move to submit grants about studying childhood dystonias. And I'm looking at all this research that's out there about how we actually learn, how the learning process is effective, and realizing it looked nothing like the training I had received when I was first learning how to fight 20 years ago. And it further made me realize that the best instructors I've ever worked with are the ones who figured these things out themselves through trial and error, or picked it up outside of HEMA as, real life teachers or something. So I went looking to see what instructors were out there, resources were out there to help somebody who wanted to become a better instructor. And I realized there's a real need for this sort of thing. So as you mentioned, there's 5 videos currently up on the YouTube channel. It covers a wide range of topics, such as how to give feedback, different modalities of learning, and how to use the scientific method to interpret original sources. So I'm trying to give a little bit of scientific content without being overwhelming, and then some examples of how you can apply that to your teaching. And it's been received pretty well. So I've talked to people who teach Longsword, Armored Combat, Rapier, TSL actually even. And they're all like, wow, these are like fundamentals that translate no matter what it is that you're doing. So there's a lot of common ground. I love how opportunities like CombatCon can bring us together to do this. I've been getting great suggestions, and I certainly welcome people to reach out to me with questions and ideas. You can use the chat or contact me on Facebook. So the video tonight is the overview video, the introduction. And this is basically looking at what happens in the brain when you're learning and how you can use that understanding to make the best use of your training time. So you're going to talk about comfort zones, goal setting, motivation, things like that. Tom, were there any questions you had for me?
No, this is good. Let me share the screen to us, and we'll come back on as soon as the video finishes out. Awesome.
Okay.
Give me one sec here.
Hello, and welcome to my video overview on the neuroscience behind effective motor learning. I'm Sarah Lewis. I've been fighting SCA Rapier for over 20 years and HEMA for over 3. My PhD is in neuroscience, and my research focuses on movement disorders. In this video, we're going to examine reasons why you should be rethinking how we approach both teaching as well as learning. We're going to examine how learning works from a science perspective, but I'm going to start by giving away the big secret. And that's humans learn best from purposeful practice, which is defined by these 3 features. The first is get outside your comfort zone. The second is practice in a focused way, with clear goals, a plan to meet your goals, a way to monitor your progress. The third is maintain your motivation. So everything else I discuss here is just the details behind these 3 core principles. The book Peak, The Secrets from the New Science of Expertise, summarizes the findings of decades of performance science. So performance science studies everything from the early acquisition of skills in infants to top competitive athletes. And it looks at how we push both individual as well as collective potential. You can read more about many of these ideas there. But the idea I want to start with is the idea that training produces brain changes. We're pretty familiar with the idea that training is going to change your muscles, your lungs, but we're less familiar with the idea that you're going to produce changes in your brain. And as it turns out, the changes that really matter for skill are going to be in your brain. For instance, when you look at cortical thickness, which is a measure of the amount of brain dedicated to doing a particular task of competitive divers versus non-divers, you see a great expansion in the areas that are responsible for both visualizing and executing complex movements. So this shows us that in order to, as we practice, our brain changes. And to learn, we have to get our brain on board, and our brain is lazy. It only pays attention to what you make it pay attention to, and we have to create a challenge in order to create change. So here we're going to focus on motor learning. you activate neurons, and that ultimately drives the contraction of specific muscles. If you want to do a very specific task, you need to recruit the exact correct muscles in the exact correct order. So when you start learning, you start with many neutral associations. And through trial and error, as well as feedback, you strengthen connections you want to keep and weaken connections that you do not. So motor learning is the process of optimizing the system by evaluating and keeping what works and discarding what doesn't. And this involves 3 phases: the cognitive phase, the associative phase, and the automatic phase. In the cognitive phase, you require a conscious decision of what it is that you're going to do, your actions that you will take. This is mentally involved because you have to find appropriate strategies to reach the desired goal. So in this time, instructors should be breaking down the lesson into single, small components and dedicating time for the person to practice it, and help the students think through the steps that are going to be required. Lessons should be short in this case, rather than trying to lay the foundation all at once. And I'll discuss more about that when I get to memory interference. An instructor should be able to model successful strategies and provide feedback to help the student achieve them. Good strategies are going to be retained in this period of time, and inefficient strategies are going to be discarded. And what this looks like is huge gains in a very short period of time. This also looks like a series of failures. And so the instructor is responsible for helping the student understand the context. If you are in the process of identifying and discarding unwanted strategies, you are going to have things that don't work. And motor learning is about learning what does work just as much as it is learning what doesn't work and discarding it. So help your students manage those expectations. The second phase of motor learning is the associative phase. This is defined by subtle adjustments in performance. This is where the student will string together several motor tasks, either in series or in parallel. Students are going to benefit from seeing how to incorporate techniques. So this is going to be where you describe how you step with a shot in order to increase your power, or incorporating a head or a body void along with a block in order to be more effective. As the student is getting the kinks out, they're going to be eliminating non-optimized sequences or actions, and they're going to be ready to try new things. This is a good time to try varying applications to actually fit the student's particular biomechanics. And this is going to require a lot of repetition. The other thing that you need to know about this phase is that relearning is even more frustrating than learning it correctly in the first place. So there's a neuroscience explanation to this. Neuroplasticity is about strengthening connections you wish to keep and weakening connections that you don't want to use. And so if you have strengthened inappropriately and weakened inappropriately, in order to learn the new task that you want to do, you have to first go back to baseline and then recruit your learning. So you can think about it as a sandbox, and you want to direct water flow to a particular point from A to B. Okay? As part of this, you're going to dig channels, that is strengthening your connections. And the more passes you go over it, the deeper and the narrower you can make your channels, and the more direct. At the same time, you're also building mounds for areas you don't want the water flow to go. So you start with a neutral associations, and then you build associations in order to direct the water flow. But if you discover that you've directed the water to the wrong point, or you've gone in a circumventous way, you need to fill in those channels. You need to flatten those mounds before you can begin to dig your new channels and build your mounds. So ideally, you should have good instructor support for new people so that they have a chance to not develop bad habits. Okay. The other thing to know about the associative phase is that improvements are going to be much more gradual because your movements are becoming more consistent. You're honing it in, you're getting closer and closer. But this can take a long time. This can take months or years. And compared to the really quick gains of the cognitive phase, this can feel like you're getting stuck. We call this hitting a plateau. And you'll also be experiencing setbacks as you go through relearning to find exactly what it is that works for you and with the other things that you're learning. And so the instructor is going to be pivotal to keeping the student motivated through this period of time. The third phase is the automatic phase, and this is where you're automatically completing tasks without it requiring conscious attention. The action is faster than thought. You're able to respond on cue, in flow. The brain is free for calculation. This is where you can be thinking about evaluating your opponent, making decision trees, and you're not having to think about the actions. You already have your toolbox of responses, and you're just going to execute that program. This is where you want to be in competition, but this is not where you want to be to learn. The brain does not actually make changes when it's in this phase. And so in order to further optimize, in order to build new skills, you have to revisit the cognitive phase and the associative phase. And we call this going back to basics, or get out of your comfort zone. So what is the motor learning process and how does it work? Motor learning is a type of stimulus response learning. So this is where you make a association between some environmental stimulus and a response. And when it's paired with a favorable outcome, this is going to be strengthened. When your stimulus and response is followed by an undesired outcome, it is weakened. So an example might be a descending cut. If you see it coming, that's your stimulus. You provide your block, that's your response. If you get the block just right and you stay safe, that is a desired outcome. If you put it out too far and your hands are exposed, or you drop your tip and the sword slides off and you're struck, that is not a desired outcome. And so you're learning how to get to precisely the right location without those little permutations that can result in an undesired outcome. So it's important that students understand what the stimulus is, what their response is, and whether the outcome was good or bad in order to form the correct associations. So this can be a problem if foundational knowledge is poor, if the stimulus is varied during training, so they're not able to connect that response to that particular stimulus. It can also be a problem if you go too fast. There's not enough time to recognize the stimulus before you need to do the response. There needs to be that sequence of events. It can also be a problem if there's not a clear communication, or the stimulus is set up in such a way that is going to be different from what they see in a fight. For instance, falling short in your measure. So this leads to part 2 of purposeful practice, and that's monitoring your progress and understanding the outcome. And for that, there's 2 types of feedback I'm going to talk about. The first is inherent feedback, and the second is augmented feedback. So inherent feedback is internal feedback. These are your senses. This is you seeing your shot land. This is you feeling being struck. This is also proprioception, being able to sense muscle stretch, joint angle, balance, where your body is in space. Augmented feedback is external. This can be provided by video, an instructor, or some other source. Instructor augmented feedback is going to be critical for a lot of body mechanic issues. Correcting, tucking the elbow in so that it's safe, that you're stepping in the correct direction. So this is a good way of helping the student learn what correct placement should feel like. And for this process, there's 2 types of reinforcement. There's positive reinforcement and there's negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement just refers to identifying the correct response and outcome and strengthening those connections. So the correct outcome produces a brain chemical called a neuromodulator. This can be dopamine, this can be serotonin. Okay, so you have the correct outcome, creating your neuromodulator. The stimulus response is electrically activating certain synapses. And when you have that electrical activity in the presence of that neuromodulator, that is when the synapse is physically changed to become stronger over time. So if you don't have in the same time window that electrical activation with the neuromodulator, you will not strengthen those connections. Okay, so it is very important that you have multiple successes in the same time period. You're going to need repetition, and you're going to need immediate feedback so that they understand that they had the correct outcome. There's plenty of ways to do immediate feedback, verbal. Another thing to look into might be clicker or tag training. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when a student is first learning, they're going to get it right. And then you're going to see more variable outcomes. And that means that when you are training, you need to provide enough time for them to get it right, get it wrong in ways that are kind of close to getting it right, and then come back to the correct outcome and being able to produce that with consistency. In order to make the long-term changes that you need, you have to actually repeat the correct sequence multiple times. Once is not enough. Stop and work it through. And the other thing that's really important, I feel, is that when the student puts it all together, you really need to stop and emphasize it, point it out, celebrate the success. So what this does is it provides a huge boost to global neuromodulators, and this is going to help with memory consolidation. And I'll tell you more about that later. So, negative reinforcement is the process of identifying the incorrect outcome and selectively weakening the connections leading to that response. And so what I will say is that the brain is very good at this. It's called error detection. And most students will notice when they've made a mistake. So while I advocate being very quick with positive feedback, it's best actually to wait a moment and see whether the student self-corrects before jumping in with augmented negative feedback. The other thing you need to know is that the brain can't implement a negative. Thinking very hard about not doing something activates the same circuits as actually performing the task. And that's why the directive, don't touch your face, is so difficult to maintain. So when you give negative reinforcement, you also need to provide redirection. That's not what you want to be doing. Here, try this instead. And remember, you might need to physically move the student a little bit, always with the student's consent. The final thing I will say about negative reinforcement is that humiliation is not a training tool. If you're making every setback and failure feel insurmountable, you're not facilitating student learning. They're more likely to quit than feel motivated to learn from those mistakes. So, motor skill consolidation, it represents the process by which a learned skill is put into long-term memory over the process of several hours. This is facilitated by consolidation tools, which look like debriefing after the exercise. So this is where you discuss what the student learned. And it's useful to use different modalities that work best for the student to help them with this. It might be having them write down in a notebook that they keep, what they learned this week. It might be going back to the manual and showing them a picture of what they learned. It might be having a question and answer period and discussing with the student, what they learned, how they plan to apply it. It depends on your student, so there's different ways to do this, but make sure that you're checking in with your student afterwards to help them think actively about what they learned and how they're going to use it. The other thing that really helps with consolidation is feeling good about your performance. As it turns out, a depressed state will actually lead to worse outcomes. So support, giving those reinforcements, making the student feel good about their performance is part of the instructor's job if they want them to actually learn and retain that material. So interference is when a competing memory is being consolidated at the same time as your desired memory. So learning multiple competing skills in the same session is going to lead to worse outcomes. Neither skill is going to be learned as well as if you had just focused on a single skill. So ideally, you want to keep training sessions short and focused. And if you do have a longer training session, that you're utilizing that time to do things that are integrated or build on one another. So drills that teach a similar concept from different angles, or doing drilling early and then using it in a sparring context later in the training session. So the other thing that memory interference tells us is that you want to spend your time working with a single teacher if possible. So teachers who have multiple competing ideas in the same time period are going to sort of contradict each other and lead to worse outcomes for the students. So for students, make sure that you're dedicating time to really work with an instructor instead of bouncing from one to another. And instructors, make sure that you are giving other instructors the chance to do their jobs and not jumping in and stepping all over their toes. So to recap, purposeful practice. You want to get outside of your comfort zone. You want to have clear goals, a plan to reach your goals, and a way to monitor your progress. And finally, you need to stay focused and motivated. And we typically think of focus and motivation as being student responsibilities, but I'd argue that the instructor plays a key role as well. And so the instructor should be establishing expectations to have the student take responsibility for their focus and motivation. The instructor should probably talk about their goals, ask the student about theirs, encourage them to come to practice, make sure they're provided with resources for outside of practice. Create an environment that doesn't sabotage focus and motivation. So the book Fear is the Mind Killer does a great job of talking about both the benefits as well as how to set up this type of environment. But briefly, some of the benefits are that you'll have good student attendance and retention. You'll have students stepping into instructor roles over time. You'll have time to socialize, you'll have time to learn separately, and you'll have students and instructors from all sorts of different backgrounds who feel challenged, safe, and welcomed. The next really key thing that the instructor can do for student motivation is communicating clearly and providing valuable and meaningful information. So know your stuff. Travel to learn with the best instructors. Read with the goal of being able to provide that information to your students. Understand different ways of presenting. Read up on different modalities of learning. Be organized and work out your plan in advance. Write a lesson plan. Talk it over with somebody else to make sure it makes sense. Practice it on a smaller group of people before you take it to a larger venue. And use your students' experiences to actually adapt and optimize your lesson plan. Make sure you're not providing too many competing ideas that are leading to interference. Make sure you're providing enough time to allow for ample drilling. So, and finally, communicate clearly. Demonstrate what it is that you need the student to do. Use feedback that works. So know the modalities that your students are responding to and try to utilize those. And if you tend to be a very direct person, make sure that that's what the student wants and is going to respond best to before you jump in every time like that. And finally, the instructor will help keep the student focused and motivated by being challenged without being overwhelmed. And this raises the question of where should teachers set the bar? And all the best science shows that you learn best right at that boundary between success and failure. Think about it. If you're constantly fighting people who are just a little bit better than you, you're going to keep improving. However, if you're only sparring people who are at a lower level than you or way above your skill level who don't bring it down, you're never going to improve. And so Locke and Lothrop talked about this. And they said that as long as the student has clear goals and don't have conflicting goals and have the requisite ability to obtain it, that there's a positive linear relationship between goal difficulty and task performance. And so a good instructor is going to set a task at a difficulty where there's going to be mixed success and failure when it's first attempted. And then the instructor is going to guide the student through the process with feedback until the student reliably hits success, the correct responses, the desired outcomes. And at that point, then the teacher is going to set the bar a little bit higher, move the student on to the next task at the next level of difficulty. And so goals are important for directing attention, action, and effort. And as it turns out, attention, action, and effort is exactly what teachers require from their students for mutual success. So in summary, learning requires changes to the brain, and this is most effective through purposeful practice. And I would argue that what instructors do is help guide students through these three components of purposeful practice. Number one, help get students out of their comfort zones, break them out of their slumps and their plateaus by bringing them back to the cognitive phase and guiding them through the associative phase. Number two, help your students with their goals. Provide them clear feedback about how they're doing. Help them build a plan and help the students set challenging goals to push the limits of their abilities. And finally, help direct student focus and motivation by providing meaningful content, a supportive training environment, and helping to direct their focus. Thanks for watching.
All right. That was awesome. Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for providing that to us and for coming on earlier and doing the intro for it. It's a lot of food for thought, right? We're always struggling with how to make our classes better, engage our students more. And then as we flip that switch and become students when we travel around, being able to recognize plateaus and recognize how we want to learn and how we can learn. And so thank you so much. It was really, really insightful and gives a lot to think about and research into. So there are a couple links that were put up in the chat too. So if you hadn't seen those yet, please take a look. And good, that actually wraps through our content for tonight. Let's talk a little bit about tomorrow. So again, we're going to continue this right through Friday. We've got Wednesday the 29th. We have the Arms and Armor group in the Oakshott Institute with Nathan Clow and the team are going to be here. We're going to have a recorded interview with Tim Anderson. Matthew Peterson is going to take us through some Indian club training, which means some great fitness and workout and strength training. We're going to continue the CombatCon officer and leadership team discussion with Chris Madden, our director of operations. And then Tim will be back with us to teach the copper color codes and avoiding violent hostile encounter. So another really good content-rich night tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel, right? 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, right here on YouTube. I want to really say thank you to Morgana and for Richard and Rocket and Dr. Lewis coming out and talking with us. I really appreciate you guys coming out. Thank you so much. Thank you again to the entire CombatCon team and family and all of you out there for tuning in. I'm Tom Amoroso. We're going to close out for the night and I'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks very much. Cheers.